Hey, BassGeek here, and today we're going to talk about the floating worm. So the floating worm, the first tournament I ever fished was with my buddy Tim, Mr. Ledgehead. You guys know him. This has been years and years ago. I won't say how many, but it's been a long time ago. And me and him missed winning that tournament. We finished second, and we missed winning that tournament by 1/10 of a pound on the floating worm. Fast forward to this year, the last video you just seen, the BFL out on Cumberland Lake, Tim ended up finishing 26th, I believe, on the floating worm. So let's start with the worm itself. There are several different brands out there that you can go with. Bass Pro Shops makes one, Zoom makes one. There's the original floating worm. The worm that I use a lot of times is a Bass Munitions worm. There are, like I said, there's several out there. It really doesn't matter what type of worm. You just got to make sure it actually floats. The one you seen Tim using was actually Strike King's. It's like a little stick bait or a Cinco style, but it's a Elastec worm. It's got a lot of salt in it, which helps it to sink just a little. It was the Zero, I believe, but it's an Elastec worm. There's really only 3 colors that I use. Now you can add white in there. It will work at times, and I have used it. I do have them. But the 3 go-to colors for me, the first one is methylate, or the big Cheeto. This color tends to work best with largemouth, bubblegum, or pink. Bubblegum really works best when targeting smallmouth and spots, like you've seen in the last video. Spotted bass and smallmouth tend to just destroy that bubblegum color. My favorite do everything, catch everything color is sherbet. It'll pull down anything at about any time in about any watercolor. So now let's talk about the rig. There's really 2 ways that I rig a floating worm. The first way, if the bass are just buried up, protecting those fry in the wood, in the brush, it's going to be a Texas rig. The key to the floating worm is actually that it sinks ever so slight. So to enable it to do that, when I'm rigging it on a Texas rig, is I actually use a 5/0 heavy gauge offset hook. So it's a big heavy hook that's going to pull that worm down. The other way that I rig a floating worm is wacky style. Now this I'll work around the outside edges of the brush, really when the bass are a little more active, they're willing to come up out of there and attack that worm. The way I'll rig it is on a heavy 3 or 4/0 round drop shot octopus hook, or I'll put a barrel swivel and use a smaller round wacky rig hook. So let's talk about the rig. Now me, I like to throw it on a spinning reel. Now you've seen Tim using the bait caster. Now that bait caster is about a 6/8 length. It is a medium heavy with a softer tip, so a moderate tip, and he's using a high speed reel. 7, 8, it's just fine. It's almost like a jerkbait setup. I like to use a spinning reel or a spinning combo, but you'll notice it's a short butt. That's key, because a lot of times you're working it down. Again, 6'8", 7 foot, depending on how tall you are, because you really want to work it kind of the same way you work a jerkbait. Now the good thing is I like to use fluorocarbon line so they don't see it. Again, helps it sink a little bit. So, you know, I will go from anywhere to, depending on the water clarity, 8 to 10 to 12 pound test. You know, I know on the bait caster, when they're really buried up in that brush, you can get up, you know, 15, 20 pound test. It really just depends on the situation and the watercolor. So, you know, be versatile, but a good starting place on a spinning rod is probably going to be about 10 pound test, especially if you're Texas rigging it, and on a bait caster, 15 pound test fluorocarbon. Again, the reel, on a spinning reel, you know, most of them are 5, so you know you kind of got to work with what you got. On a bait caster, if you throw it on a bait caster, the higher speed the better, so you can catch up with the fish once he hits. So let's talk about when, where, and how to throw the bait. So the best time to really throw this bait, when this bait is at its most productive, is right when the bass are getting ready to go up on the bed. Now after they're on the bed, you know, really locked down, you can catch a few on it. But it really shines when the bass have spawned. They're garden fry. That's when you can really get out there, chase those bigger males, get those fish to really come up, work it through those balls of fry, and get those fish to just come up and destroy this little bait. All right, presentation. Guys, the presentation is really super simple. Whether it's wacky rigged or Texas style, all you want to do is make sure that that bait just sinks barely out of sight and you pop it up just barely where you can see it. And that's how you work it back to the boat. Let it sink barely out of sight, pop it a couple times to where you can see the bait again, barely out of sight, pop it, work it that way all the way out of the cover or all the way out of the boat, depending on if you're fishing some large spawning flats. So I really wanted to share this with you because I think the floating worm is a very underutilized, overlooked bait. I know I've seen a couple of videos about some of the pros using it, and it's something that I've used for a long time. Tim kind of introduced me to it and the technique, so I really wanted to share it with you guys. So any questions you have about it, as always, questions and comments in the comment section below. You know I love to answer your questions. You know I love to talk to you guys. Make sure you ring the bell. YouTube has changed the notification process, so now being subscribed doesn't mean you automatically get the notifications when my videos come out. So make sure you go ahead and you ring my bell so you get those notifications. Like it if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. You guys rock.